a little round beanie they put on our heads, and then two girls stood behind a LED screen, and they pushed a button, and it seemed like I saw some flashes. And she told the other nurse, "Oh my God, I've given him too much. Oh 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 my God, I've given him too much."
Welcome to the Devil in the Details podcast with your host, Will Nesbitt.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Devil in the Details podcast, the podcast where I investigate and expose ongoing, unlawful, non-consensual human experimentation on innocent men and women in the U.S. and possibly abroad. I am one of those people victimized by this atrocity, and now I am working hard to restore justice by sharing evidence and information in hopes of prompting a proper investigation. Join me in my fight and help raise awareness by tuning in and sharing this podcast with your family and friends. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Devil in the Details podcast. I am your host, Will Nesbitt. Let's get into it. So today's episode is another good one. Today we're going to be talking about a man who was experimented on when he was only 5 years old. Vertus Hardiman grew up in Laos Station, Indiana. And when he was 5 years old, he and 9 other children, there were 10 of them, their parents were told that they would be treated for a ringworm. But instead what happened was they were secretly experimented on by having radiation blasted to their heads. And this caused some serious problems for these boys, and they suffered a variety of different health issues throughout their lives. Mr. Hardiman had the worst of it, because what it did was it severely left his head severely deformed, and it left a hole in his head. And he's lived with this and suffered through that his entire life until old age. And it wasn't until he finally confided in a friend that he told his story, and he told that story to today's guest, Dr. Wilbert Smith, who created a documentary and wrote a book giving us all the information to understand what Mr. Hardiman went through, and also to talk about his life. It's an amazing story. It's an inspiring story. I can't wait for you to hear it. But first, let's learn a little bit more about Dr. Smith. Dr. Wilbert Smith was raised in Los Angeles, California. He is an author and award-winning filmmaker. His most notable work is the book titled Hole in the Head, A Life Revealed, and an award-winning documentary of the same title. Through his work as managing partner of Smith Leonard Productions, Dr. Smith endeavors to stimulate his audience by demonstrating the essence and power of the human spirit. He inspires others through his message of hope and commitment to education and hard work. Before forming Uplift Productions, Dr. Smith enjoyed a successful business career where he worked for Bank of America, for 29 years. He has taught in the School of Business at Pasadena Community College. Today, he serves as a senior fellow in education policy for the Pacific Research Institute for Public Policy. Dr. Smith continues to own and operate one of Allstate Insurance Company's premier insurance agencies. His faith is strong, serving as pastor of Home Neighborhood Church, whose membership is non-denominational and multi-ethnic, residing primarily within the greater Pasadena, California community. Dr. Smith is an outgoing and fluent personality, an author, lecturer, and consultant in the areas of business, education, law enforcement, film, and government. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the podcast our guest for today, Dr. Wilbert Smith. Dr. Smith, thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
I'm wonderful.
So tell us a little bit about you and your background and how you got started as a filmmaker.
Actually, I'm a business man from quite a while back. I first entered the business world by working for a bank for 32 years. And then I went into the insurance business and owning a few insurance agencies. And then I was one day elected to my local school board, and it moved me in a direction of being extremely interested in the welfare of young people. I've always been one connected to the church, so singing in the choir was something that was always attractive to me. So, given that, I decided to involve myself with one of the local churches, and that's how I met Vertus.
So you meet Mr. Hardiman and you two form this friendship, this bond through your church choir. How did you come to know about his ordeal?
I didn't know. In fact, it was something that I wish I did know. In fact, I wish the community knew. But it was a well-kept secret. He wore this interesting hairdo. It was an actual wig, and it was styled in the form of an Elvis Presley kind of hairdo, the one that was tall on the top and sort of slender on the side. And it was one where it didn't have any gray hair in it. Now here Vertus is well up in his 70s, perhaps his 60s at the time. And I'm saying to myself, doesn't this guy know that this hair piece appears to be false? Why doesn't he do this? Why doesn't he consider that, et cetera, et cetera? So that was sort of floating around in my subconscious mind for years. And until one day, I realized, after he told me his story, I realized why that wig was shaped the way it was. And it hit me in a way where I was extremely saddened by the fact that I would even entertain something as trivial as the style of a wig/hairpiece that he decided to wear. This occurred for about 20 years. I stood next to him in the church choir. He always stood next to me. He relied upon me. He wasn't really a very strong singer, so many times I would sing directly in his ear to keep him on pitch, and things along those lines. So we became extremely close, obviously, after 20 years. And it led to the making of the film and the book and the school curriculum that has evolved from this amazing story.
So tell us more about Mr. Hardiman and exactly what he went through with these experiments that caused his injuries.
Vertus was born in the 1920s in a little place called Lyle Station, Indiana. Lyle Station was a black township named after Joshua Lyles. Joshua Lyles was a black man, and Joshua had a little bit of wealth that he had acquired, and he donated land to the local railroad. Because of this donation, they built a stop on the rail line in Lyle Station. Well, this was amazing to have a railroad stop in your town. That meant that you would begin to add to your population. There would be a place where people could actually come and live, because they're guaranteed that people could ride the train to come and visit with them. It also meant that if you were a agricultural environment, which these individuals who ended up settling in Lyle Station were, there were sharecroppers. But boy, could you imagine having the railroad stop and take your crop to market versus putting it on a wagon, having mules pull it, and think about the amount of actual product that would be lost in this transition process of simply getting your crop to market. So he was a very forward-thinking man. Donate the land, and in exchange for them building a stop on the rail line. And this is why eventually, in its heyday, Lyle Station, Indiana had 55 families settling there. And of course, many of them were related. And they had this particular school. It was called Lyle Station Consolidated School. It had a principal, a black principal, by the name of, all the kids called him Uncle Joe, because many of those kids were his nephews and nieces.
Oh.
And these kids were wonderfully educated. In fact, the kids from Lyle Station, those black kids from Lyle Station, outperformed most of the schools in the remainder of the state of Indiana in terms of their test scores, in terms of their acumen. And so they had this outbreak of scalpel ringworm in the school. Now, in the old days, this was a fungus. In fact, I remember going to elementary school in the 1950s, and this was a prevalent kind of outbreak that took place in our schools. And you were normally asked to wear a little cap, a little white cap, that was designed to keep you from infecting the other students. Well, in this old country school, you brought your hat in and you hung it on a nail. That was the hat rack at the time, or of the day. You hung your jacket or sweater on a nail. And of course, once the ringworm infection jumped from garment to garment, it was placed on your head, and that's how the ringworm spread. And that was something that these little sharecropper parents, normally to treat scalpel ringworm, you bought a bottle of iodine. If you didn't want to use iodine, you used a bar of lye soap, and you would wash away the fungus. And that was how it was handled. But the local hospital had another idea. They felt they could come to these parents, and instead of having them use the traditional way of resolving the fungus, they decided to have these parents maybe save the pennies that they would spend for these medications in lieu of accepting this invitation to come to the local county hospital and take part in a new, innovative, and creative way to treating scalpel ringworm, which were these X-ray machines, these radiation machines. And the intent of the medical staff was to experiment on these kids because of the fact that they had been donated to by some benefactor, and they would learn how much and how to use this machine by answering questions like, what's too much radiation to administer? What will be the effects of administering a certain level of radiation? And who were the guinea pigs? These kids from Lyles Station Consolidated School who were affected by this outbreak of scalpel ringworm. He was irradiated at a local county hospital. This is where this took place. He was 5 years old. They took him there, and the mother signed the permission slip. And the mother thought that this was something that was going to kill the scalpel ringworm. Remember, her son, Vertus Hardiman, attended Lyles Consolidated School where the outbreak took place of scalpel ringworm. Had no idea what was getting ready to happen. Well, Vertus was one of 10 children they irradiated that day. And the person in the front of the line was one of the brave ones. But who was at the back of the line? Vertus was. Because Vertus was only 5 years old. In the 1920s, you didn't start school until you were in the first grade, meaning 6 years old. So mother always regretted that she put Vertus on that school bus that day. Vertus gets there, he's at the rear of the line because he was the youngest and most timid. Well, the first person in line got the least amount of radiation shot through their scalp. Who got the most? The kid at the back of the line. It was progressively turned up each time a kid went in. They turned the radio on as loudly as they could have it so that the next kid couldn't hear the screams of the child that's going before them. And then once they were done, they were taken to another room where they were examined by doctors to look at the effects of the radiation. So this happened in a county hospital. Where did Vertus work? In 1951, he was now 10 years out of high school. He heard that they were hiring Negroes at the time. I'm recalling the ad at the Los Angeles County Medical Center. And they were hiring Negroes to be janitors. Vertus rushed down there and hired on. Now, remember, it was a county hospital that did this to him. Vertus ended up working almost 50 years in that county hospital. And he became a department head in charge of maintenance and what have you. In spite of what was done to him in a county hospital, he went to a county hospital for work every single day. What an incredible man. Just to be able to do that, to be around radiation, etc. Now, it did affect him in his private life. He was afraid of even having a clock on his stove. He wanted nothing to do with anything that was electronic. Never had a microwave, this sort of thing, because it was radiation that caused his problem. And if you go to holeinthehead.com, you will see how it affected him and how he eventually died from cancer that affected and penetrated all the way down to his brain. So this is a story I guarantee you're not going to be the same after you view it. And I suggest the combo pack. And guys, we've got this thing priced at a point where the combo pack is going to run you approximately $42. So it's priced because we want you to have it. We want you to know this story. We want you to be inspired by this story.
I can only imagine what it must have been like for the parents to learn that their children weren't being treated for fungal ringworm as they had been told and trusted the doctors to do, but were in fact experimented on. How did they find out that this had happened, and what was their response to that?
Well, this may seem to be a very bizarre outcome and situation, but most of the time these parents never learned what was done to their children. And when they went down to find out and to the hospital to get questions answered, they were met by local police who demanded that they clear the lobby. Now, can you imagine your child being burned to such a degree where you were never able to grow hair again? The pigmentation of the skin was awful now because of the effects of the radiation. The same cancer-causing radiation being provided to these kids in major doses. In some cases, it was determined that these kids were given more than 1,000 times the acceptable levels of radiation, and it was actually shot through their heads. And we'll get into the story of what has occurred around the world to indicate that this was not a first, and nor was it the last time that there is history reflect that experimentations have been going on with respect to radiation. Now, I know that sounds like a tease, but I'll briefly cover that now and then get back to our story. In the early 1950s, Israel became a state for the first time. And the state of Israel needed money, of course, being new. And the United States knew that Israel needed this money. In the same breath, the United States was in the process of building the atomic bomb. And it needed to know the effects of that bomb on human beings. So Israel has not only vetted this story, they are paying reparations to families for selecting children for the United States Army and conducting experiments on behalf of the United States Army by irradiating over 100,000 Jewish children. And many of those Jewish children were sent to the United States in cages for further study. Yes, I said cages. This has all been confirmed by the Israeli government. And there is a actual documentary that has been done in Israel. It's called The Ringworm Children. And Steven Spielberg was kind enough to provide my team with some of the information and some of the footage from that documentary, which I have put in the documentary that you and I are discussing now, entitled Hole in the Head, A Life Revealed. Now, if anyone is interested in getting this story, I will give them information in just a moment. So get your pencil and paper ready, but it's an amazing story. But it's not the traditional somebody has done somebody wrong story, because I think society has had enough of hearing and reading about those stories. This is a story that illustrates what a person can do with their lives in spite of the hand that they've been dealt. In spite of what happened to them, this man actually succeeded in ways that you will not believe. This one example I'll give you is this man lived with a hole in his head so severe that you can look inside his head and see the dura mater that covers the brain. He covered that up with a wig. And he went to work for 40 years and never missed one day of work. How many of us can say that we have the kind of fortitude where we would ever get that kind of award, which this man received that award from the County of Los Angeles? And I don't know if at the time there certainly were not more than two individuals out of over 100,000 employees who had that kind of attendance record that they could lean on and put out there, showing the kind of character that they are and that they possess. The actual website to go to order the story is called holeinthehead.com. HOLE, holeinthehead.com. And there you can not only purchase the documentary film, but you can purchase the book. And there's also a song that was written for Vertus called I Choose to Love. And in that song, the lyrics talk about the choice that we have. We can either choose to or to not love and move forward with life in a positive way. So that I encourage all to get it. You'll be very, very pleased with the story, and I guarantee you it will change your life. We also want to step further, and the proceeds from this incredible story benefit a educational foundation. And we're also using the proceeds to move forward the curriculum that we have written for schools.
The other 9 children that were radiated in this experiment, along with Mr. Hardiman, what happened to them? Is there any information on how they fared in life?
In the book, I have found and identified all of the children. And each of them lived with the same kind of burning of their scalps. Each of them succumbed to some form of cancer related to the head area. Many of them could not have children. Many of them, the men, had sperm counts that were so low, affected by the radiation. It affected them. Only one was not affected by cancer, and that was because he met a death when he was in his 20s, where someone clubbed him in the head, and it cost him his life. But all the others, you knew that they were irradiated. You knew they were part of that experiment. And I think one of the things for me is when you talk about the parents actually, they're in the book. I talk about a lady who was a white lady who went to bat for these parents, tried her best. She went and found them a lawyer, made sure that lawyer did not charge them for his representing them, and took the case to court. Now, mind you, I had indicated that in Israel there was a lawsuit drawn, a class action suit brought by the ringworm children, and it prevailed. And to this day, families, descendants are receiving reparations from the state of Israel. But in the United States, that case was brought to court, and in the preliminary hearing, they were asked the question, well, did you sign permission to have this done? Yes, I did. You did sign the permission slip, correct? Yes, I did. Never the question of, did you understand what you were signing? None of that came out. And the court felt that all the hospital did was do what the parents had given permission to have done. And the case was thrown out and never went to trial. So those parents, given the court case, they never really found out in detail what was done to their children. They were never able to go to the hospital and talk intelligently or treated with respect, and some member of the medical staff came down and told them what exactly took place. No, none of that occurred. So it was a very trying time for these Black families back in the 1920s. Now, remember I had indicated that this happened in Israel in 1950. Do we realize how much time difference between when it happened to Vertus and when it happened in Israel? and we were still using the same excuse, scalpel ringworm, and that we were going to kill it with radiation. And the kids in Israel where this occurred, think about this. These kids were taken to a location near Haifa in Israel. And they went to a local school. Remember, it was 100,000 of these kids. So it was all over the school system. And they asked the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jews to remain seated, and the Moroccan Jews, who were the darker-skinned Jews from places like Africa, etc., were asked to stand, and they were escorted out and put on buses, taken to this location in Haifa. They were their heads were shaved. There was a gel put on their heads, which was designed to make the cap that they were going to place on their head next sort of adhere tighter to the scalp. And then they were given all this excess radiation. And again, we were in the process of developing the atom bomb, and we had another bomb that we were supposedly rolling out and working on at the time we dropped that bomb on Hiroshima. It was called the mother load, meaning it was much more powerful. Well, they found these X-ray machines later on that were used on these kids, and the labeling, the ID labels were still on the machines, and those labels said United States Army. Again, this is not something I had to go to Israel to research, etc. It's already done. It was already in the documentary called The Ringworm Children. It also in the documentary lends credit to the state of Israel, who is paying reparations to families. The family members are interviewed. Those that were given these excessive levels of radiation and actually survived are interviewed in this documentary. So a lot of the appropriate dynamic footage from that story is in the documentary entitled Hole in the Head, A Life Revealed. And you can get that incredible story through the website holeinthehead.com.
Did Mr. Hardiman ever marry? Does he have any family, any other family that's still living in Indiana or elsewhere?
There are members of the Hardiman family who are, yes, alive. It's a great question because I would be remiss if I did not indicate to you that I took Vertus to Indiana where this took place. When he gave me permission to do his story, I got on a plane, took him with me, and we interviewed people as senior as 100 years old who told the stories. One lady, who I talk about in the book, says, I was sitting right there at my desk, and I watched the kids go by in the hallway, and she said, we cried. We were just that close. We knew they were going to the hospital for something, but we didn't know what it was. But we cried because we were sad by the fact that our fellow students were on their way to the hospital. And so to hear those stories, to hear individuals talk about what it was like seeing the kids that were irradiated, one of them said, for instance, Vertus, who was the young 5-year-old who received the most radiation of them all, she said, he's my cousin. He comes to the house. He has been to the house 3 or 4 times and slept in my bed in the extra bedroom. And I never knew what he was hiding under a wig. I went to a convalescent hospital where Vertus, his brother, this was during the same trip. I went to the convalescent hospital and I went into the room, and I have a PhD, so Vertus would call me Dr. Smith. So the convalescent hospital where the relative was, who was also irradiated, they wanted to restrict me from going in because they thought I was a medical doctor. And they did not play that. They were not going to let another medical doctor come in there and see their patient. So I let them know that I had visited from California. I had brought his brother, and I am not an MD, and so I was allowed passage into his room. Well, the manager came in and was sort of supervising to make sure that everything was okay and that I didn't have any other narratives that I was pushing. And so she said to me, he's got some bed sores on his head. I said, ma'am, those are not bed sores. I said he was the victim of an experiment. And I said, if you apply any pressure at all, his scalp will cave in. Your finger will go right through the bone into the inside of his head. She was so taken back. They had no knowledge of any of this occurring. And remember, in the old days, sharecroppers, poor individuals, there was little communication, minimum kind of opportunities for the rest of the community to know from a technical, from a medical perspective, what's affecting someone and how it might affect them. So I will never forget that experience. And in the documentary, I do show Melvin was his name. And I showed Melvin and his situation in that convalescent hospital.
You know, I can only imagine what it was like for him to not only suffer and deal with that injury for his entire life and not get any justice for that, but also to hold on to it and not tell anyone, to hide it from the world. What made him keep it a secret for so long? And what made him finally decide to confide in you about it?
It is to this day. I actually was the one taking care of Mr. Hardiman. I was the individual washing and caring for his wound. Could you imagine? Now, we all know that flies are attracted to rotting flesh. If didn't wash his wound in a timely fashion, at least twice a day, we would be outside and flies would land on his beanie, sensing the rotting flesh underneath. He had to engage. He had to be involved. It was a matter of survival for him. He said to me, my head feels like when you put your hand on a hot stove. He said it burns all day, every day. He could not have a pillowcase touch his head. He couldn't have the sheet touch his head. It was just constant agony. You see, this man endured something, but he never complained. This man endured amazingness, but yet, when he was ever asked the question, are you angry? He's immediately and very sharply answered, no. Because if you're angry, that means your heart is not right. And if you're angry, that means my prayers will not be answered. In fact, he said to me one day, could you imagine I'm at church, I'm at the altar, asking the Lord for forgiveness. And perhaps the person who did this to me is at the altar also, wherever they may be, asking God for the exact same forgiveness. Who am I not to provide that forgiveness? Now, there are a number of individuals of us who say, I don't know if I want to be that forgiving. I'm saying to you that this is the way Vertus chose to live his life. That's the level of forgiveness that he chose to exercise. So life was tough for him, very tough for him. I remember going to the hospital. We were there, and there was a team of 9 doctors who were there to help him. We went through interview, analysis, evaluation. Weeks later, came to the table. Vertus, the night before, had actually packed a suitcase. That's how optimistic he was, that they were going to be able to help him. When we got to the hospital, there was 2 individuals there, not 9, just 2. And they were delivering the news that they could not help him. There was no way that they would ever be able to close the gaping hole that was left in his head by the radiation. And that his scalp was just too porous. I remember Vertus calling me to his home one day, and that was the first time he noticed that his scalp had broken. And it was a piece of his skull about the size of a toothpick that had broken away. And now he's saying in a panic mode, what am I going to do? I have a hole in my head. How am I going to survive? I have a hole in my head. And I eventually realized we used just saline water. And we squished it around and we shot it around and let his head hang down and it would drain out with all of the sourness and the spoiled components just rolled out. So a lot of sadness, but yet I realized that he wasn't sad. It's all he knew. This was life as he knew it. But again, I hope as individuals, go to the website holeinthehead.com, and that's whole spelled HOLE, holeinthehead.com, and click on order now. It's a great documentary out there. There is a wonderful book that was written that tells all the details that goes into the amazing history of Lyles Station, the Black Township, the place where, by the way, it was a stop on the Underground Railroad. And if you made it to Lyles Station, that was called Freedom Village. It was nicknamed Freedom Village because if you made it that far north, your passage to Canada was almost guaranteed. You get to Canada, you're declared a free man, free woman. So it's something we need to know about and appreciate. We don't always learn these things to learn about the bad deeds. No, there's much more to it than that. To see how others persevered through darkness, how they persevered even though they couldn't do certain things. But they ended up becoming very successful people because of the extra hard work. Today, we find that there are colleges, junior colleges everywhere, but yet we don't enroll. We don't take advantage of it. I listened to Vertus, and Vertus said his school was about 30 miles away. He said, but he remembers days where he almost would try to walk. That's how important it was to him. Could you imagine if we today had that kind of spirit, that kind of eagerness, wanting to succeed, needing to succeed, knowing that it's there, and why not have it for us? Why don't I claim it for me? I think that there is so much to be learned from Vertus Hardiman and his fellow victims of the Lyles Station County Hospital experiment.
To see that he lived his life, a good life, even in spite of all that he had to suffer through, is very inspiring, which is one of the reasons that I really wanted to highlight his story and your documentary. Now, are there any plans to offer the documentary on any streaming platforms or digital platforms?
Eventually we will. Everything requires funding. And when I first did this story, I was never looking for any kind of personal gain from it, as much as I was looking to get one of the most amazing stories, one of the most inspiring stories that I had ever heard. I wanted to tell as many people about it as I possibly could. But then reality set in when I would get an email. I bought a book and I shared it with my entire family. Or I got a book and I shared it with 20 other people. And I'm saying, no, please don't do it that way. Inspire the other 20 people to purchase the book. Inspire the other 20 people to purchase this a documentary. Every home should own it. And that's the way I envision being able to move the product and to at least develop enough funding to go forward and do other great stories. So that is fulfill my wish and still my dream that individuals, concerned people would go to holeinthehead.com and click on Order Now. Now, I will say to you that I have been able to go to some colleges, some universities. When we first put the story out, there was a lot of fire out there, a lot of energy, eagerness for people to learn about this story. And when I went around to some colleges and some of the individuals were so inspired by what this man could do. And when I saw a young person say, if Vertus, with all of the challenges that he lived with, if he could do well, then so can I. And that's when I said, oh, wow, this is the story. It's penetrating. People are receiving it exactly the way we intended it to be received. So, is there a future? Absolutely. Do we plan to stream? Yes, we do. In fact, I have written a script, and most of the proceeds from the actual film will go to pay the talent, and the other remainder will go to an educational foundation. You see, the nice part about this is that my life is now centered around grabbing someone else by the hand and pulling them along, which is, I believe, the way many of us feel and think once we've been successful in our lives and successful in our careers, successful in our business life, or whatever the case may be. So I will be 74 on my next birthday, and it is my dream to see this story get into public schools. And if you take a look at the number of young people who are not doing so well, those that they want to call at-risk individuals who are not doing so well. I take an example of Black males on every category, every measurable category. We are dead last when it comes to student achievement. I'd like to change that. I don't want to sit and just give lip service to it. I think we have something through our curriculum that indicates to individuals that in spite of, you can achieve. In spite of, you can do well. We want to teach them how to know themselves, to grow themselves. We want to teach them the importance of focusing time to become a good communicator, a good writer, which everyone can do that. It just depends on whether you think you can or whether you think you can't. Either way, you're really correct. So that's sort of the focus of the kinds of things that I lived with Vertus, heard Vertus espouse these things from his own thought process. An incredible man.
What's next for you? What upcoming projects do you have going on? And you mentioned a film earlier. Tell us a little bit more about that.
I've written a script on this particular story. And I'm, like many other struggling individuals, wishing I had the means to do the film. I wish I had the A-list talent that said, wow, I think that there's so much to be learned from this, that I would love to be a part of it. And instead of me taking my money up front, why don't I consider taking my money on the back end? I think that this story will do quite well and earn amazing awards as a result. And then we have an opportunity to earmark a lot of the money income that we're talking about from a story like this and put it into a foundation where we can get our success numbers up. I look at things like the NBA. The NBA said that they're going to invest $300 million into the Black community. I would love to see that instead of going to put in more gyms. I would love to see us allocate some of that to the classroom. I believe that organizations like the NBA, these kids, there are hundreds of thousands of basketball players all searching for the dream of playing in the NBA. Well, every year there's probably 10 new players that are invited in. 10. Those are sucker's odds if I've ever heard of sucker's odds. Instead of investing in more kids who skip school, skip class, in order to be out there on the basketball court trying to enhance their, and it's not only basketball, we all know it's tons of sports, but invest that money in our classrooms. That's where you can help us. So that's my dream. That's where I'm coming from. I have run for state superintendent of public instruction in the state of California. I finished third out of 14 candidates. I almost had that assignment. I've almost been in a position where I could make a difference in the lives of some of these young people. But I will tell you, we have an incredible script, an incredible story. It's not only entertainment, but it's the kind of information that will lend itself to us having a better outcome, doing better, performing better on academic levels, performing better. I think we can do this, and I'm excited to at least be able to represent Vertus Hardiman. You know what Vertus Hardiman said to me one day? Oh, Wilbert, nobody's going to be interested in my story. I hear your enthusiasm, but I don't think anybody will really be that interested. I said, Vertus, I'm going to do everything in my power to prove you wrong. And that's where I've been ever since, trying to prove him wrong.
Are you on social media? Do you have any social media accounts that you'd like to plug? And also give us that website one more time.
The documentary is at a website called holeinthehead.com. And if you click on order now, you will see the options we have available in order to get the book, the film. We know we have to upgrade, but upgrading requires, funding. I would love to be able to have this available where people could stream it. I would love to have it available where people could, just download the product, but we're not there. And in our next rounding, I hope to be there one day.
Well, Dr. Smith, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. Thank you for the information you've given us about Mr. Hardiman and what he suffered through and how he chose to live his life, not defined by what he suffered through, but by how he chose to live his life in spite of his suffering. Yeah, it's an amazing story. It's a very inspirational story, and I really appreciate you telling it. Thanks again for being here.
My pleasure, Wilbert. Thank you.
Well, this concludes today's episode of the Devil in the Details podcast. I'd like to once again thank my guest, Dr. Wilbert Smith, for his time and for all his information. I encourage you all to please go and visit his website and get the documentary, get the book, get the song that was specially written for Mr. Hardiman. And we have to share this information, share it with your children, share it with your friends, share it with your family. Let's put this information out there about these experiments. These are not things of the past. These are things that have happened. And since there have been no punishments for these, and the researchers have gotten away with it, they will continue to do it. Never think that it can't be you. Okay? These things are still happening, and we must be alert and made aware of it. Please visit Dr. Smith's website, holeinthehead.com. That's www.holeinthehead.com, and get the documentary. And be sure to also reach out to Dr. Smith if you have any questions as well. He provided his information. So for the podcast, please stay tuned for the next episode, which will hopefully be coming soon. I do have a couple of guests lined up that I think you'll also be interested in to hear. Be sure to go back and listen to previous episodes as well. I think you'll enjoy those. Also, sign the petitions at change.org as well as Color of Change, and visit and join my social media sites. Subscribe to the podcast so that you can receive alerts, and be sure to stay tuned. We're going to have some upcoming interviews that are going to be live, and we'll start recording the podcast live. So please stay tuned for that and join me. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your attention. Please join us again. New episode coming up soon. I really appreciate you all. Thank you so much for being involved and being engaged. Thank you. Take care.